Hi, this is Kelly Sadler with the Washington Times. I'm the commentary editor here, and this is our politically unstable segment. I am joined by Scott Walker. He is the current president of the Young America's Foundation. He was the former governor of Wisconsin and a 2016 presidential candidate. Welcome, Governor.
Good to be with you, Kelly. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. I want to kind of start with the news of the day, and that is the war that has broken out in Israel. I want to ask you, how did we get here? You know, under President Trump, we had the Abraham Accords. There was no wars in the Middle East, let alone, in Ukraine with Russia. Kind of, how did we get here, and how do we get out of this mess? Because the world seems very unstable right now.
Sadly, it is. And ironically, I'm standing right here at the Reagan Ranch Center, and images of Ronald Reagan and some of his foreign policy successes behind me. One of the things he said then that was true during President Trump's tenure as well, and that is peace through strength. The opposite of that is weakness opens the door to evil. I said we saw that with the failures in Afghanistan when Joe Biden's administration botched that withdrawal, so much so it not only left 13 Americans dead and arguably many more when it comes to U.S. allies in that country, but it opened the door to Vladimir Putin, the dictator in Russia, thinking he could go into Ukraine. I think it momentarily gave pause the reaction there. Otherwise, you might have seen Xi Jinping and the CCP going to Taiwan. But all these things are connected. It's the constant weakness that we see under this failed commander-in-chief, Joe Biden, even so much so as recently, not only transferring or announcing the transfer, hasn't fully been completed, announcing the transfer of $6 billion to Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism, but on top of that, the lifting of sanctions. These things are all connected. I warned about it almost 8 years ago to the date at one of the debate stages. And sadly, I wish I was wrong, but we knew that Iran was a threat then. Announcing that those funds and the lifting of sanctions were happening, opened the door to, I think, Hamas and eventually Hezbollah, thinking that they could attack Israel. And now we stand in this awful predicament today.
Yeah. So what should the Biden administration do immediately?
Well, first off, they should, Robert O'Brien, who was the national security advisor for Donald Trump before that, had been the head of the hostage team and was really successful at negotiating that. We should be sending in full-scale hostage teams to try and withdraw any of the Americans who are part of that larger group of people who've been taken hostage, who've been kidnapped by the terrorists in Gaza. They're involved with Hamas. So we need to get Americans and other freedom-loving people out of there as quickly as possible. Along with that, though, I think we need to reinforce, not just in word, but in deed. That means helping send not just money, but literally ammunition that Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, and others there need to keep the Iron Dome intact. It is a largely successful system. It obviously wasn't perfect when you have sky gliders and other things coming in, but to keep these missiles, even moments ago, I just saw visions of video clips of missiles being aimed towards what appears to be the airport in Tel Aviv. We need to make sure they've got a nonstop arsenal to use the Iron Dome to protect from those attacks. We need to push back. I think we need to freeze the assets and reimpose the sanctions against Iran. And I think the president needs to continue. Now, he kind of woke up after the first day or two. It's amazing that this guy didn't get briefed till 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday when things started at about 11:30 Eastern time. But you've got to have a president that's extremely forceful, whether it's telling Turkey or others out there, do not be engaged in supporting those attacking Israel. There'll be consequences.
Well, he did a nice job today, unequivocally supporting Israel. It would have been a nice speech to have on Saturday, and today would have been a good speech to say what we're going to do, what steps we're going to take to kind of put Iran back in a corner and to cut them off from the rest of the world via sanctions and funding. But, foreign policy has never really been a front runner when it comes to what voters vote for or vote about. Inflation, the economy is always the number one driver, and foreign policy is it's down there on the ladder. Do you think that might change, given all the conflicts that are happening in the world right now, that might change in the 2024 contest? And should the GOP candidates be addressing this issue forcefully?
Well, yes, on that latter part, they should be just as a moral issue. And I give Kevin McCarthy, the former speaker, credit. He's no longer the speaker, and yet he's been the most forceful national leader, I think, talking out about not only how bad this is, but what should be done, kind of in the absence not only of a speaker, but of a president for all practical purposes. But in terms of the voters, I think it's a 1-2 punch. The economy is already a wreck. It's why the president's numbers, President Biden's numbers, are already starting to fall apart in key states like mine and other battleground states. You even see in the poll we've done at Young America's Foundation, the number one issue with younger voters, not what the media says, but what the polls show, is actually the economy. And so you don't take your eye off the prize. It's the economy, stupid, as James Carville famously said years ago. But I think at the same time, it's a 1-2 punch against Biden. He's failed on the economy. Now let's point out he's failed internationally, and it could arguably, sadly, I hope and pray it doesn't, but it could pull us into some sort of protracted, not just a war, but some sort of a protracted effort in the Middle East, which I don't serve in anyone's interest. Counter that with the fact that we had no attacks, we had no problems, we didn't have Putin in Ukraine, we didn't have Middle Eastern attacks. In fact, I'd like to have more mean tweets. Remember that mean tweet against the Iranian leader that Donald Trump laid out several years ago? Well, he came in and he targeted a general who was looking to take out Americans, and boom, he was gone. And that's the kind of deterrent that works. Peace through strength works. Weakness opens the door to evil.
So I want to get into kind of the work that you're doing on college campuses and with students and with young conservatives. We've seen an alarming display out of college campuses this week of groups siding with Hamas, siding with the terrorists, and blaming Israel for the brutal attack an invasion of their country, where, you know, there was reports today that Hamas beheaded babies, parents being killed protecting their children. These student groups active on these campuses, and some college professors as well, are saying that, you know, the Palestinians are the victims, you know, the Israelis are, you know, the occupiers, and the Israelis deserve everything they get. This is hate. This is anti-Semitic hate. Kind of how are we getting this how are we as conservatives confronting this very progressive, hateful message that's being spewed on college campuses right now?
Well, we just got to push back over and over and over again. Thankfully, we have the truth on our side, but we've seen this long before this awful weekend, that you see it, whether it's targeting Israel, whether it's targeting our own founders. My goodness, you think with the 1619 Project, with critical race theory and other things like this, you'd think if you talked about people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, you'd think they thought they were the most evil, awful people possible. Yeah, sure, they had their faults. But the idea is the American promise is not only great for America, it's that shining beacon that brings people in from around the world. We've got to counter that. If people hate America, they're going to hate Israel. One of our supporters at Young America's Foundation is a very strong proponent of protecting and supporting Israel. And a few years ago, he came to me and he said, I'm going to help you, because if young people don't love America, they're never going to love Israel. And so the two go hand in hand, but we've got to combat this. I hope the visuals, as graphic and horrific as they are, I hope these visuals start to wake up young people and others across not only our country, but across the world. Anyone who could behead, not just kill, but behead dozens and dozens of small babies, who could take an elderly grandmother and not only kill her, but broadcast it on her Facebook site so that her family would see it, who could rape and pillage. I mean, these are things that we've only read about in the past. These are not the kind of modern day horrors that we would expect. And yet that's exactly what is happening out here. And no amount of political disagreement justifies any of that. I think the response is going to be aggressive. It's taken a while, but even Barack Obama, Joe Biden, even the Prime Minister of Canada and others who are normally on the far left, I think have woke up to just how outrageous this is. And I think, thankfully, I've seen largely, at least in the Western world, unanimity in terms of saying Israel has a right to defend itself. We'll see if it lasts.
Well, thank you, Governor, for joining us. And we all stand with Israel. For all the latest opinion analysis, please go to the Washington Times commentary pages. I'm Kelly Sadler, and that's it for today.